Welcome to the Self-Healing Revolution, where ancient wisdom and modern science meet. I'm your host, Paige Pearman, an Ayurvedic practitioner and integrative wellness coach. I own a practice based in Louisville, Kentucky. My purpose for this summit is for you to learn tools and techniques to biohack your body, master your mind, and elevate your soul. I know personally that healing your life isn't a one and done approach. There's no one magic bullet. It has taken me over a decade personally to heal my own life, working with many professionals and many experts in many different fields. With that being said, I work closely with my clients too, and I help them see that it really is the whole mind, body, spirit approach. It is my pleasure today to introduce you to my guest speaker, John Butts. John is the CEO of the Natural Action Tech and also founded the American Water Trust. Both organizations work on improving water in the micro and macro perspectives. He graduated from the Naval Nuclear Power program and began a career in industrial machine design and integration. Over the last 20 years, he has designed, built, and tuned hundreds of large-scale machines serving the automotive and performance, agricultural, steel, aeronautics, and aerospace industries. In 2007, he began evaluating water, designing, and building water machines. He observed remarkable properties and behaviors within water while analyzing it. This led him to shift his focus into biological functions, with water being the primary regulator of electricity. He recognizes water as the fundamental ingredient to all matter in life. Wow, John, you have such an impressive resume, and I personally met you at a music festival, and you had a table there, and I had known a little bit about water and its healing properties, but just diving into a conversation with you that day just opened my eyes and into what I kind of already had a sense of, but you had the science and also just understood the ancient wisdom of what our ancients did to utilize water in their own healing. So with that being said, like, what is living water?
Basically, I don't think it's kind of how we view life in our consciousness in the complex sense of emotion and all the details that we can perceive and sense. It's probably a little bit more basic is the good place to start. And then from there, you can kind of see its reflective nature.
Awesome. Yeah.
And that's the way I would view it, as like a mirror. Very much how like the unified models that I consider to be accurate, like from Walter Russell, where the universe is reflective and slightly reiterating things like, let's just say more like a nurturing, where there's subtle changes to gently guide the process towards life rather than away from life. And you get to a simple point where you realize it's like a balance equation where, well, if it wasn't always leaning towards life and integration more than the other, eventually it would be like the explosive theory, where they call it a death by heat, where the universe just separates until there's nothing left, right? There's nothing congregating anymore, which is a total false paradigm. But moreover, that nature and water are always integrating more than they're separating. And it always bothered me, the physics and the science and the engineering and all that always led toward separation technologies. So psychologically, when you're going to school all these years, all you're taught is separation in the fundamental mechanical sense of the universe. And so I was always trying to find that missing piece and didn't realize it was so simple. And water, when I started watching the vibrations in water and how it was mutating itself and mutating its environment very gradually. And at the same time, there's some really high speed stuff going on when you get down to the depths of it. But the big changes, the macro changes that really have an effect on our world and on ourselves and our own perception are really slow. You're talking about weeks of water mutating at a time sometimes, where it's and needing rest, right? I started to notice these resting cycles, that if they weren't present for the body of water, that the water became kind of cantankerous or moody or unpredictable. and somewhat threatening to be destructive, but was never really destructive. But it would show signs of it, and then you would kind of say, okay, there's something wrong here. Let's stop and take a break. Let's not push on this until we know what we're doing more. And then you would come back in the next day and start working on that same body of water after it rested overnight, and it would behave totally different. And so
Wow.
it's kind of hard to explain or record to get the point across unless you're
Yeah.
present with it, watching it evolve. And I'm like, man, this kind of behaves like a human being.
Yeah,
It's
I love
temperamental, so that's what really flipped my whole direction and connected my, like you said, I always fished and hiked and really saw water as like the center of where I was heading or going just because of its necessity. But I really didn't have that mystical to scientific bridge built.
yeah.
And while I was doing industrial development, ironically, it just like became obvious to me and changed my life. Like, I'm like, now I know what I'm doing with my life for certain. Whereas
Yeah.
before I was kind of like, I'm not sure if I'm going to keep doing this. I don't really, I don't feel fulfilled by it. But once I hit the water, it was like a foundational culmination of everything I had ever studied or been attracted to. And so I
Gotcha.
felt like very complete at that point.
Right. I have a couple questions for you. So
Mhm.
I'm an Ayurvedic practitioner. So in Ayurveda, we look at the five great elements. We look at ether, air, fire, water, and earth. And each of them has a part of, our makeup, right? So like what's on the macrocosm is in the microcosm. And how water behaves, like, has its own intelligence and its own properties. And like I thought it was interesting. You used a word that you said was unpredictable about water. Like you could see these unpredictable patterns, and it made me think about like cancer cells, that they would show that there's like this unpredictability. So it's like, when somebody's unhealthy, what does water look like in a healthy person, and what does it look like in an unhealthy person? Is it unpredictable, when somebody's consuming water? Like, I'm just curious, people think of water as it's just a thing
A chemical, right?
yeah, it's just something that I'm built up. But like, how much of our percentage of our body's water? Like 80%
I mean,
roughly?
it's the majority. There's debates
Right.
on it when you break it down that it's actually more, and that really doesn't matter. And the majority of the earth, the majority of any living thing and ourselves are water.
Is water, right? So
Yeah.
with that being said, like, wow, if we just think about that alone, if 80% roughly of our body's made up of water, then it would matter what what's happening to that water right before it even enters into our being or our cells. And so I have a question, like, if water is unpredictable, if like there's this unpredictable, what does healthy water look like, and what does chaotic water look like? Can you explain that to me?
Sure. There is some science that hasn't really propagated. I've done a great deal of work to try and get it to propagate, but due to the usual human elements, it's not as easy as it should be, but it's very simple. So like if we take an engineering or physics view, there's entropy, which is a fancy word for disorder. And that's usually caused by heat or pressure, or maybe excessive heat or pressure, right? So, and there's a purpose in that. It's not a bad thing. But when you do too much of one thing and not enough of the other, you get a memory of an imbalance in the water. People talk about memory of the water, right? Well, it's
Right.
almost like the human, like if you have a bad experience over and over and over and over again, eventually it changes your energetic persona or your emotions of how you perceive the world, right? It changes reality in a way for that observer. There is no one reality, right? And there's no one reality for water. And no matter how hard we try as a science or a people or a spirituality or religion, we cannot pin water down to this one definition of reality. And that to me is the most important part. And when you look at the nervous system and autoimmune and fight or flight and the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, all these more biological and medical terms for what happens to the body, is precisely what happens to the water. And so there was a German scientist who developed a method. And basically what he found is when the water is placed under too much disorder or stress or heat or pressure for too long and depleted from its natural motion and cycle, evaporating, recondensing, flowing in a certain way. When this is disrupted for too long, the water gets stuck, just like your body gets stuck and you become autoimmune or a stage 4 to stage 5 illness on like the Vol scale, right? And you're probably familiar a little bit with the modern day electrical work crossed with Ayurveda and Chinese medicine, where that stuff turned out to be 100% true, that the electrical system gets stuck out of balance. Well, when we look at the root or the ground of the entire electromagnetic spectrum on Earth, in a cell, inside the cell, outside the cell, in a human being, in the brain, there's a right angle pattern that shows up in both the blood and in water alone that is traced. So you can't see it in water, but if we put a witness in it, like a mineral, like just say like calcium or any mineral, and we watch the water evaporate, it leaves a fingerprint behind of what its energy state was. And so what Andreas Schultz discovered is that anywhere in the world where the water was known toxic or where somebody was known chronically ill, there was a certain simple definable pattern in the blood or in the water that indicated it was in a stuck state, which allowed us and everyone developing water technologies to figure out how to unstick it. Right. But that doesn't mean you can just drink one glass of this living water that has the ability to adapt. Right. So if you study plants and soil, if you study the human body and you study water, where everything gets into trouble is when it stops adapting and it gets stuck in a state of defense. And that is like a fear-based, right? We could call it fear instead of love or acceptance. Right. And then when it's stuck in this state, it's all downhill and goes into a state of decay. And so getting a healthy plant, a healthy soil, a healthy human body, a healthy water involves certain parameters that basically unstick the water rather quickly. And the human being is a big memory bank in the water and the blood. So it's a foundation for the rest of what got it there. Right. And then those are also knowable things. The mineral or the atoms are the foundation of the physical universe. When those become depleted, it overloads the body's system in trying to regenerate tissue. And so the vitamins don't work correctly anymore. So you can take as much vitamin C as you want. It won't be absorbed by the body in certain states, in these types of states, right? And there's a number of ways to measure these things simply, but in the end, when you do this tracer, and it's under the microscope, and it's at like 200 power, you can actually see it at like 100 power, changes in the patterns that are scientific. And it's not like Emoto's work, and it's not like Veda Austin's work with ice. This is a totally different pattern that is very, very repeatable, very scientific. The medical community does not accept it, and water has always been rejected as the foundation of biology by, say, the pharmaceutical companies or people who think you can take one thing and resolve a problem, even though in that case, we all know that that's not true. And the same is true for herbs and water. You opened very beautifully. You have to work on, I always break it down into music, right? We met at a music festival. There's 12 notes in music. There's only 12. When you look at good stories, good movies, good songs, it's comprised of 6 to 12 aspects. And if you perfect that balance and learn how to adapt with the seasons, with your age, right? It's always changing. But when you get those tools and use them all in a harmony, and water, in my opinion, is the medium that these sounds travel in, that this information of harmony travels in, right? And water is working to go, hey, this is a little bit off. What if we
Right.
just shift this a little bit? Does that help you uh, get more knowledge? So in a way, water is a consciousness, and ether, not a chemical, to come full circle.
Wow,
It's a
I love,
living thing that's very simple.
yeah, I love that you just said that. I want to go deeper in what you just said, because in Ayurveda, again, I'm trained as an Ayurvedic practitioner. So I look at how the five great elements work in the body, and ether's, another element, but you just said, the ether is in water. I mean, like, honestly, all the elements kind of exist within water. I mean, like, you have earth through the nutrients, right? The minerals that travel, there's trace minerals in the water for one, which would be the earth element. But ether sound, that the vibrational frequency of sound is it's almost like it absorbs that and becomes a memory for that. Am I correct in saying that?
100%, 100% correct.
And then, right, like we use fire. So you talked about pressure. Like if there's too much pressure, there's too much heat, that can disturb the water, which is that element of fire. Air would be, how water moves, but like like water is such a transient thing. And I love what you said. I want you to speak further into how sound affects water, like the vibrational frequency of the ether element within water. Can you talk about that further and kind of tease that out for people listening that may have never even thought about this before? Like, this may be the first time that anyone's ever hearing about water from this perspective ever.
Sure. And so I'll go as far to say is that water is the physical form. This is my weighted opinion based on all my observations for many years of my life that culminated with very, I don't want to say rigid because that's not right, but very solid recordable evidence of vibrations, which we could call sound, right? So let's just say sound is a very closely grounded version of a vibration that all humans, even if you were deaf, like Beethoven, right? You have this feel that sound, articulates. So the frequency range called sound, but it's really no different than the frequencies of light, the frequencies of color, the frequencies of, and so how are all these frequencies arranged, and is it harmonious or not, right? And so they come into the water, and what it looks like with good evidence is all those frequencies are absorbed or grounded to a fundamental point that has intelligence involved in it, which I would call the ether.
Can you
right.
repeat that
And
again?
so somehow the physical water on Earth as we know it is as a container. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. It just the sound was a bit slow. Can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, there's a little lag, but I think the recording will come out solid. I'm getting it from your end too. So basically to condense it, water more or less is a computer, a universal computer that sends and receives signals like a computer does. And the signals it receives aren't the same as what it sends back out. And what it looks like from a scientific or engineering point of view, to get specific, is that the vibrations coming in are altered without changing the identity, the information, the code, the DNA, whatever you want to call it, comes into the water, and it changes in a way that Tesla described to change things for more energy conservation or more efficiency. And so if you can measure all this out, you get direct scientific evidence, but more or less water is working to massage information to make that information more understandable, more ordered, more constructive rather than destructive. So, it's kind of like, in a way that like musical software nowadays, if a singer is singing and they go out of key, you can take the software and put them back into key. It's kind of like that, but not exactly like that, but it's working towards harmony. But it doesn't completely destroy disharmony, because disharmony has a purpose too. That's part of life. So you can recognize harmony, right, without the the two without the dipole, you couldn't really discern or recognize or create. Creation comes from an imbalance, right? So
Right.
we just want to minimize the imbalance, and that's the direction water is. Living water is heading that way. Water that's pinned down is it's kind of behaving like a chemical. So when you don't treat water right, it does behave like science says it is to a degree. And
Yeah.
when you treat water correctly, it behaves the opposite of what science says it is.
Right. So before we talk about how we can access water that behaves in a non unpredictable, chaotic, what were the words you said? Like it makes like this T
Right angles.
right angle. Yeah. And so it makes a right angle pattern. And so you said it's in a state of defense or decay. So what have we done to water, one, to get it this way? Like, let's just look at that first so we understand like what makes it behave that way, and then move into like what makes it behave the way that would be advantageous for us,
Gotcha.
to consume. Can
I'll
you
cover
break that down?
Yeah, I'll cover it in two perspectives, from the micro and the macro.
Yeah.
And one has to do more with rhythm and timing, and the other one has to do with like mechanics and shape. They all come together in music, right? You have rhythm, timing, melody, harmony, low frequencies, high frequencies, right?
Okay.
And so one major one, simple, is that we're pumping the water under pressure and the wrong force all the time, the centrifugal force, which is a separating. Centrifugal means we're rotating so hard that everything's coming apart. And the pipe is basically holding everything together. So the water is trying to break the pipe. And we just build
Wow.
a stronger pipe, and then the water stresses off its own center. And
So it becomes really unpredictable in that environment. Is that what you were saying?
no, it actually becomes more predictable because it behaves like a chemical. It doesn't,
Oh,
it's not alive anymore. I shouldn't say it's not alive, it's dormant, kind of like your grass in the winter.
okay.
It's not really engaging with the ecosystem in a active way. And then when spring comes, the grass comes back alive and grows again. So you can never really kill the water. It's a
Yeah.
universal dictate, I believe. Water, it's the ether, not time, not space, not force. Nothing can overcome it. And so pumping it around in straight lines, simply because if you look in nature, water never ever flows in a straight line, and water is always spinning in nature. It's always rotating. And this is part of the natural energetic purification process that also contributes to water property and its ability to filter and purify itself. So that's the micro, right? We're in a room or in your home, and there's straight pipes everywhere. And that's right here and right in front of us. And we can see that water doesn't behave like that, but we're forcing the water to behave like that. With our current knowledge, that's practical for us. But is it practical for us all to be unhealthy and sick?
Right.
No. So that needs to be looked at and changed. So that's part of what our company does, is help change that in your home. Now, in the bigger picture, you got the whole entire, some water plants tap lakes, some tap underground, some tap rivers, right? But we're pumping that water to the home in straight lines everywhere. And metal is another thing. Nature doesn't have concentrated metal everywhere.
Right.
So even though metal doesn't really isn't totally dissonant with water, the natural flow path in nature is more what we call a dielectric, where the metals are minor. Like you don't have metal rocks in the river. You have metal lace within calcium and metal lace within silicon, which are all dielectrics, or that's the same thing. Computers are made out of silicon crystals, right? That stores information, right? So there's a relationship with the elements in water that is preferred by water. So if you copy that, you're more likely to succeed with the health of water, like say in a mountain stream. And water has this life cycle. Another thing we can see in Andreas Schultz's work better than any other work is the life cycle of water, the beginning and the end. Looks like in the ocean, where it's more still and a larger body, what it looks like in a lake, what it looks like from deep underground. And so what you see is a similar similar pattern of circles. The water has a very simple structure. The tracers, or the elements within the water that we look at under the microscope, are circular. It's a very basic geometry. Whereas, like, if you sample the water when it's mature in the middle of, say, a mountain stream, where it comes juvenile deep from the earth, and it rises up through all the elements in the earth, and it gets its journey and it's learning, it's meeting all the layers of elements, right? You have carbon layers and diamonds and gold pockets and calcium deposits. And so you're like meeting concentrates of strata. If you ever look at a cross section of the earth, there's lines in it, right? So it's like almost like going through grade school of, being introduced to all these more complex earth elements, right? Beyond, a little bit beyond just carbon, right? But water is extremely responsive to carbon and silicon. Those are two musical octaves of water. So, we know those are harmony with each other, and water responds to those very quickly. And as it rises, then it comes to the spring, and there's warm waters, which behave geothermal, like artesian springs, which behave, and normally you don't drink those. Those are not high quality drinking. Those are moreover like healing water, and there's degrees of those. But the big producer, Victor Schauberger, was big to point this out in biomimicry and copying nature. Understanding copying nature was his coined phrase. And the water generally comes out of springs at 39 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the water's densest point. And so this becomes the strongest point of water to mature. So this would be like, say, it comes out to the surface and meets the manifestation of all that embodies what the earth grows, and what is antenna to help grow the earth. All the plants, all the things on it also receive energy to feed earth, the earth grow. It's a symbiosis. Both produce each other. So at this point, the water goes through a journey, and about mid-stride down the mountain stream, when you look at the best quality waters in the world, we have, say 12 to 14,000 feet, and then about halfway down at 7,500 feet to 9,000 feet, where oxygen is changing, the atmosphere is changing, the trees are starting to put green filters on the water. And right in there is where the magical and high quality waters start to happen. Then after that, the waters start to become toxic and take on a cleaning role. They start picking up all the animal debris and dung and toxins that are natural, and they carry that out towards the end of their life to a lake or to an ocean, and contribute to a different ecosystem than the flowing eco. So that's kind of like the old age is where the water ends up and dies. Then it evaporates. And what's interesting about this life cycle is everything you can imagine in the cycle: evaporation, distillation. These are all alchemy terms, condensation. There's fancy terms in alchemy for all this, but basically you're exalting or freeing something into spirit, and then spirit is returning back to matter in a different way. It's not the same way anymore. Whereas chemistry says this circle is all the same. And so to answer your question in the macro, we're short cycling the water. We're no longer allowing it to die and be reborn again with better quality. We're running it in a really short little circle where we dump it back in the river in your neighborhood, and then they scoop it back up, they mechanically filter it and deliver it back to your home. And doing that,
you just real quick. There, you were saying, I'm just curious, you were talking about when it comes up through the spring, it's 39 degrees Fahrenheit and it's at its densest form. But then you said like the trees filter the water. Like a lot of people say if you could get water straight from a spring, that would be the healthiest. But maybe what you were saying is that filtration after the spring water be healthy, or is it right from the spring if you were to get it straight from nature?
Without a shadow of a doubt, the mature water is after it goes down the stream.
Yeah, so it's not in the spring itself, but it's once it's filtered through the trees, right? Like it's filtered through the environment even further.
It's exposed to green frequencies. And so what Victor Schauberger and actually everybody biologist knows this now, has been exposed to it. If you chop down the vegetation around a river and expose it to direct sunlight, the river dies very quickly. So
Right. But it's just interesting
a
because
lot of
I mean,
people,
I've just always thought like, like if you're trying to write, you're out, traveling and you're trying to get access to clean water, you would think getting spring water would be the cleanest, safest source, but you're saying it's the next step after that that really is the healthiest water. But I've never heard that before. That's interesting.
correct.
Um, so
Yeah.
with
The water's
everything
not
you're
mature coming out of the spring. That water can
yeah,
be good, right? That water can be good. And I'll tell you why, because we're taught all the waters are poisoned. So people's perception is if I get it right here, it's not poisoned yet. And there is truth to that statement. However, if most people are not going to go hike into a wilderness area. But my first experience with living water was when I was 24 years old, when I drank really high quality living water. It was about at 8,000 feet in Montana. And the moment it hit my mouth, I 100% knew it. 100% knew it. It's not that I'd never drank stream water elsewhere, but this was very mature, untampered with mountain stream water, right? Which is hard to access. So the spring is where people default to for quality water. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a more juvenile water, just like distilled water has a very good purpose. But you need to understand what drinking juvenile aggressive water is and how you can modulate it, right? So water becomes a complex relationship of young, mature, and there's mature that's not good. That's
right.
been contaminated. So it's a entity that has like a quality in its life cycle.
Right. But I bet a bunch of people who are just hearing this right for the first time when they hear this recording will be thinking to themselves, my gosh, okay, like we're not only getting it delivered, taking it out of its natural state, but then we've filtered it and it has like this whole filtered process. And like you said, it behaves like a chemical at that point, but then it has a ton of chemicals in it. And so I know you've got a lot more to say, and I have just a question that I definitely want you to hit upon is that, a lot of people buy water filtration systems, like say a Berkey filter, for example. But then it's still like you may be filtering out the chemicals, but it's still, if the water's not being treated in its natural state, it still would behave like a chemical, even though you may be taking the chemicals out of it. I'm sure people who are listening to this are like, my God, like, then I'm sure you're going to offer a solution, but it's like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I'm drinking water that's gone through this whole process of coming to me through this line. It's been filtered, then it's laden with chemicals in it. And then it doesn't even have the trace minerals in it. So if somebody were to like have a Berkey filter in their home, how would that be beneficial or not? I'm not picking on Berkey filters or anything, but like, how would that be beneficial or not beneficial if they think, oh, I'm drinking the healthiest water I know how?
Yeah, it's difficult to say exactly. And I think the end user, the person consuming it, ultimately has to make that decision. So here's a little bit about filters. If there's concerns in the water that are, obvious toxic levels, obviously filtration needs to be considered. Nature has plenty of filters in it, right? The difference between nature and our view of filters is the opposite. Nature does filtration by dilution. We do filtration by concentration. Secondly, one thing we know as a fact is that water takes on the information and sometimes property of what it flows over. So if we have a filter and the filter concentrates toxins and the water's flowing over that filter, the physical may be removed, but the signature of the toxin is not.
Wow. That's huge.
It is huge.
Wow.
Just like you can put a frequency of a nutrient in water and carry it and pass that information on to a system, it doesn't discriminate. it sees all information and reiterates all information. So is that as bad as ingesting lead? No. But if you still have the signature of that lead in the water, then that water is under a stress condition, a heavy metal, right? And this is a big gray area. It's probably not so great at Ayurvedic teachings, but to
Well,
modern
actually, I want
day, you
to wait,
know,
but I want to say actually Ayurvedic, like gemstone healing, well, two things, like you would put, if you wanted to increase the fire element in water, you would, you could put a decoction out in the sun if you wanted to increase that solar energy, or you could, take a decoction and put it in the moonlight, and water would absorb the energy of the moon. But also Ayurvedically, you could use the energies. Like I love what you said, is that the water will take that signature. So gemstones, like if you knew what energy frequency you wanted for somebody to heal them, you could use a gemstone and soak it within that water. And that's saying exactly, like, on the one hand, where it can have the signature of a toxin, then if it can do that, then what Ayurveda said about just soaking gemstones in water would be true, because it would pick up the signature of that gemstone and the healing properties of that gemstone.
100%. I mean,
Yeah, so Ayurveda was doing this. I mean, like,
the ancient cultures knew that water was not a chemical. Chemicals really weren't in their repertoire. They did elements, and they understood the elements very, very well. Well, if you look at the pole shift in the human race, everybody considers the element to just be the things that exist, not things that have spirit and influence. And I think that's ridiculous, because those are the primal influences over all things. And what I was studying with water actually had the elements built into it in an exalted form, which was fire that was actually relatively cold instead of fire that was hot. So now you get a whole new spirit, and that's water, right? It led me to believe that the sun is actually water. The sun is not hydrogen and helium. The sun is actually a transition state of water that vibrates outward and condenses in the eyeball of the earth at the right frequencies, at the right place. We're in the third orbit here. And that's what drives life. So that every solar system would kind of begin with water as a sun, and then manifest a planet with physical water in return. And so it's kind of like the mother element. It's different from fire. It's different from earth, because it's a precursor. It's the seed of earth. It's the seed of fire.
Yeah. In Ayurveda, the most subtle element being ether is, like the sound, the vibrational frequency of Om, that's the seed sound, the Bija mantra, the sound of Om was like that subtle was created first. So I don't know the answer to that. I just know that Ayurvedically we're taught that the most subtle part of nature was ether first, being sound. But then as you study water, like you just said, it's like it becomes like a memory bank for every frequency of sound that moves through it.
A more grounded Akash, you would say, like the ether is recording everything. So Walter Russell, his statement was, the only difference between the water of earth and the water of heavens, meaning space, is volume. That was his statement.
Oh, interesting. Wow, it's so fascinating. So I know I keep kind of pausing you, but I just wanted I'm so like wanting to tease out some of the things that you're talking about. But with that being said, so we've looked at how water can be disturbed. So how do we rectify this? Like that's what you're essentially working towards, right? Like that's what you do. So can you speak more to how to rectify? We can't 100% mimic nature, but we have to do something, right? I mean, if we really want to drink water in a healing way, so that we don't have this square T angle, then what do we do, and how can we rectify that?
Basically it's so I will say this: there's no way we can, as you said, get the degree of what nature brews as a baseline for, out of a home, out of all these straight pipes. But surprisingly, we can pretty quick get back to the general state that is alive, that is adaptive, that is intelligent. And at this point in my career, I will say with the individual's creativity and the relationship that they build with that sacred fundamental element that's usually considered to be the divine female, the manifest of the divine female. For you and your water and the water you create, you can probably supersede the baseline of what nature is producing out in the middle of the woods that's more made for that area, that ecosystem. Apple that I would say if you take the time to get, in an alchemy state with your relationship with water, that you probably can do the things in your home to brew water, to take it to a medicinal level, to take it to a conscious expanding level. You can use that tool to create whatever you want to create. And creation, that space being the most important factor. I'm a pretty rigid scientist and engineer, but I'll be the first to say, like, it's like music. If somebody told me I had to play what's already been played over and over again when I pick up the guitar, I wouldn't play the thing. I play it because I want to see what comes through me. And water is more or less a porthole between the physical world and the spiritual ether, because it contains, this is pretty scientific fact when you look at the research, not the research in chemistry, not the research in shorthanded physics, but the research of life force energy, of subtle energy, which is a pretty vast subject. I teach it in our webinars, and it's a lot simpler than, and there's an Ayurvedic crossing. There's there's chi, there's prana, there's all these different teachings, the walk-in from the Native Americans. So you have about 12 different teachings worldwide that all see the same behavior beyond electromagnetics, just referred to as subtle energy or life force energy. And that's the ether. That's the desire part of it. That's where everything's born out of. And water's the same sense in the physical. So when you connect with that and be creative, you embody the first dictate of the universe, is creation occurs.
So, yeah. And I want to tease out, I'm finding this so fascinating, but I want to tease out when you talked about water being alive and adaptive and intelligent. In Ayurveda, the first tissue of the body is called your rasa, and your rasa is in your blood. It's like the water, the fluid of the blood itself is your rasa dhatu. And in order for you to have all of your tissues or all of your body to be healthy, the rasa has to be healthy first. And that is like the blood plasma, and so when you were talking about looking at the blood and seeing that right angle T, it's like, no wonder. It's like, if the rasa is the water element of our body, and you're talking about taking the blood and looking at it, and if the water has this right angle T, it's shown immediately in the blood. And so from an Ayurvedic perspective, if that is unhealthy, then the rakta, being the lymph, is going to be healthy. The rasa rakta, mamsa, the fat tissue, metis, the muscle, the ashti, the bone, the reproductive system, every other tissue is going to be weakened because that tissue or that element is not healthy to begin with. So it's like, if we can't start with that fundamental element of water coming into our system with the right structure, or the right, if you were to put it under a magnifying glass and look at, I think when it looks healthy, right, it like has more of a snowflake pattern. It looks more dynamic, and it's like, if we can't get that correct, then everything else is suffering, because that is like the first layer of our health. So how do we, I know you talked about the prana, but like, how do we mimic this in the best way possible? So water's coming into our faucet, and then what do you recommend that we do? What happens next?
So the flow correction, right? That's part of what our company does. They call it flow forms. And that, if you get into Rudolf Steiner, Victor Schauberger, John, think it's John Wilkes. He worked with, I believe, with the biodynamics too, and started doing gardens. So they
Mhm.
went after the earth and growing healthy vegetables, right? And looking at the moon cycles and singing to the water and stirring to the water. And so basically the presence of the left and right vortex simultaneously represents the unification of the male and female energies. And
Mhm.
so the flow forms basically, they do a number of things from a mechanical engineering perspective. They breathe the water. So a good flow form will drop pressure or go to a vacuum, breathe in, lungs expand, vacuum, air comes in, and then pressure out, right? Breathe out. So you do these things over and over again. And then the materials like like the strata we were talking about, when the water comes from the ground and the water learns these elements before it goes into its, free fall, its descent, back to the ocean where things manifest, right? There's no
Mhm.
fish living in the ducts, capillaries of the earth, right? So this is where water really gets exposed to life. And the
Mm.
trout, ironically, is one of the more beautiful fish, and it won't only live in the highest quality water. And the golden trout and the brook trout are typically only higher altitude, and they will die in any water that's not of that quality. So simple indicators, right? More beauty, more color, more diversity, and you can feel it. You can stand next to those. As a matter of fact, you could be 100 yards away from those rivers, and you can feel it when you're in the mountains.
Yeah.
What is this vein is belting out energy, right?
Yeah.
And so, you see that journey again and the relationship. And I think that's where you start, is by watching the whole journey of water and going, what if that was me? And all these elements and beings were just other living things that I'm interacting with, right? And now you start to embody the roots of water, what it is, what its journey is.
Right. So like you can, I'm just asking more out of curiosity. So like you could mimic obviously the structure of nature with water, but then Ayurvedically you would collect that water in your home and let it sit and pick up the frequency of your household so that it didn't have like the memory frequency of everything that happened before it arrived into, say, your home. And then, like you said, like the music, like you could have sound healing around that water and keeping it in a vessel before you consume it. Um, just creating like
Any
a good sound frequency and energy for it to just like you would keep it, say, in a copper vessel. And then you would just have it be there for at least 24 to 48 hours before you would actually consume
Correct.
it.
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
we make technologies that incubate and brew water. Victor
Mm.
Schauberger referred to it as ennobled water. So we from
Ennobled
a
water.
Yeah, ennobled water. And that's the water he said he learned how to copy from certain areas along the mountain stream that animals and people in his mountain village always knew had unique properties. So think about that. There were spots along the river that had different properties 200 yards upstream and downstream. That's how sensitive the water is to its incubation, to its birthing, right? So what
Mhm.
you're talking about is the creative aspect where, yeah, music, pyramids, orgone accumulators, there's no science to it. What I really do not like about science and marketing in the modern human day, uh, methodology, right? Is we're, kind of sell shit, buy shit, get the hell out of Dodge mentality, and we'll make up whatever we got to make and pretend like we're the king, yeah, of the knowledge, right? And I'm going, no, if anything's the king and queen of knowledge, it's water. If you want to get down to the simple, and it's your creativity and your relationship that will make it effective, not Jay Butts's technology, not this guy, not Victor Schauberger, not any of these people who claim I have the magic recipe to put in water to make the best water. Only you have the magic recipe for your water to make the best out of it. And if you skip that step, we can make it better from an engineering perspective. We can make it better from a medical perspective. We can make it better from a spiritual perspective, even. But that's nothing compared to what you can do in the arrangement. And some of this stuff is a no brainer. Like, Yeah, do it in your whole home because it's going to change the energy of your whole home over time. If you study life force energies, it takes time. Life force energy adapts slowly. It's not fast. It's otherwise every thought would change everything and the world be a cantankerous mess because human beings' thoughts are all over the place. So like water is the buffer between thought affecting manifest, right, in your brain to the outer, aspects. And the really solid recording, like a computer, like long-term memory, short-term memory, right? Adaptation, that's what it takes.
Right. So what do you do with your water? Like, obviously you have the structured water, and then you have, what do you do? What do you personally do with your water? Just curious.
Okay, I have, so I get water from what's called French Creek, which is a feeder to Lake Erie. So the
Mhm,
source isn't all that bad.
mhm,
It is short cycled. It is pumped through straight pipes. We talked about the negative side of that, the negative aspects of that. The water would be considered dormant if we
mhm,
tested it coming in.
mhm,
So I use our basically our medium grade. I don't have our high grade stuff on my home.
mhm,
Uh, Probably because I do a lot after the water
mhm.
comes out of the tap.
Right. That's what I'm
And
curious. Like, once you have, obviously you have your
basic
technology that
technology.
helps. Yeah. And you can talk about that before we end on the hour, but yeah. So once you have it go through your process, right, the technology that you've had installed in your home, what do you do then?
Okay, and I have a under the sink filter that's
Mhm,
of carbon, and it's more of a deconcentrating filter, meaning it spreads toxins out very handily. And that's more like a higher form of carbon that's made heading towards a diamond, the same way you would artificially make a diamond. You make these filters, and they are called carbon block filters. And
and do
there's
you
different
provide those with your company?
we do. They're the only filter I've ever tested that we could put after our technology that didn't seem to degrade the process that we put on the front side of it, right? So, in a number of ways, we do these custom or we do these very simply under the sink. And my feeling is the water is good enough everywhere else in the home, just with the revitalization process. So only the drinking water goes through the filter, and it's much smaller, easier to change, more cost effective. At that point, for what I call maintenance water, sometimes but rarely I will drink directly from that. And usually in the evening, if I don't want energy up, I would just that process is fine. The water's in the middle. Usually in the morning or the middle of the day, or if I'm working late, I will go through further processes to what we would call put the blue or the North Pole or the South biomagnetic energies into the water, which have an energy effect on your metabolism. They raise your energy, kind of act like coffee without the side effects type of
What do
thing.
you mean when you say that? Or is it where you're placing the water?
No,
In
I have other devices.
Okay.
And like I actually incubate the water overnight almost always. Nighttime is where water gets a lot of its charge. If you're a fisherman, when you go at night on a full moon or at night, it's particularly on a full moon, which is also a North Pole magnetic or a biofield south, kind of energy up condition, flow harder, move more, transition more, adapt more, clean more. It's busy, it's working.
Mm-hmm.
You can hear that in a river. At night, the flow picks up, and at
Oh,
night at a
wow.
full moon, it really picks up. And then cooling the water down to 39 degrees. So I incubate it and brew it, kind of like what you were talking about. The Ayurvedic Indians are pretty aware in the deeper the Ayurvedic teachings. There's other teachings in India. It's a big country, but they all kind of use silver and copper, and that
Mhm. Copper is what
creates the
I'm more
male
familiar with.
female. Yeah, the silver is the brother and copper is the sister
Oh,
elements.
okay. I never heard that before.
And then when you put those two together, a small voltage is created, what they call, a bimetallic voltage. Almost every instrument we use in engineering that generates a signal is from bimetallics, from a battery. And so that creates a situation in the water that's very measurable, like in engineering terms. So, I mean, it's just kind of like Dr. Vole did with all the Ayurvedic and Chinese acupuncture. He actually was like, wow, these people knew exactly what they were doing with electrical voltages.
Yeah.
And how did they know, And
Well,
so different
yeah.
ways, right? Maybe some people it's better just to do copper. Maybe some people it's better to do silver. Maybe most people it's probably better to do both. So I've had some Ayurvedic customers from India, and they said, I want a copper metal lining in my unit that you're going to build for me. And I would say, how about I give you a copper liner, but we electroplate silver on the inside of the copper. And she was like, I never heard of that. But then she called over to India to more deeper Ayurvedic practitioners and knowledge. And she called me back and she said, you were right. They said to put a copper coin. They put a copper coin in the copper pot. And so she wanted it for her whole home, right? So this is more practical, for the whole home. So they have a good understanding of the totality of the environment and how it shifts. Just kind of like feng shui too.
Yeah,
the energy.
So like, do you have a place in your home where you like more like a vastu, like a place where you put the water in your personal home, like where you would? I mean, there's nothing. Maybe you have to go that far.
Yeah,
I'm just curious.
yes and no. We sell a technology called the Carbon Gene Z, and that's what I use. And it's a vessel that only holds about 4 ounces of water, but it has radiation shielding. And part of the process of nature, right, is the vacuum. So we want to breathe in the water. So we're kind of like switching the pole of water in a deeper way. We're putting it under a vacuum, which is the opposite of pressure, the opposite of stress. So we're de-stressing the water by putting it in a vacuum. And then it has 12-sided, 5 articulate, which if you're familiar with carbon 60 and carbon is 12 and the 5-sided makes 60. So here's your alchemy going all the way down to numerology. So the unit is built in an alchemy sense and it is shielded from radiation. So it's quiet. It's like a deprivation chamber for a human being for the water. And so more or less, it would be the first time in a long time that the water ever sees quiet. And so I let that rest at least 12 hours overnight.
Wow, there's so much here. So much to unpack.
And that's a custom creative unit, and it's designed to encourage creativity and alchemy with the user. And so we manufacture our own crystals out of it. We stick with like gold and silver, a little bit of copper, ormus, seawater mineral of ormus, which ormus is highly misunderstood, but it's the root of ormus is water. And so when you flip the pole on an atom, it's like flipping the pole on water, but the pole is taking the water from a stress pole to an unstressed pole. So the other pole can come out. The male, female energies in water can now unite. And that's when it'll go to work for you, and water loves to work, it loves to do stuff. So that's kind of what I do for my, and it took a long time to get there. I used to put it in a container and put orgone like pyramids with it and try all sorts of different stuff. And I ended up with that. And I got acclimated to that water and now I'm partial to it. I wake up in the morning and if I don't drink that 3 ounces of 39-degree water or 4 ounces, I don't feel the same. It doesn't set my day up as right. It's just how it worked for me. It's different for everybody. And there's other ways to do it too,
Right. So again, for people who are hearing this for the first time ever, like where would be like the number one starting point or 1 or 2 things that you would say like right out of the gate if somebody was interested in and
simple copper pot, silver coin, structure of the water. We have portable units, so you don't even have to spend like for the whole home. You can start inside your body.
Yeah.
Which will make you more conscious of the energy of your home. And that's kind of the cascade of synergy that goes on here just ends up as, like when you hear music you love and you just want to move, you just want to smile, you're just having a good time, and you don't realize it until you're in the presence of it. So you can try and go, hey, I'm going to a concert, But till you get there and experience it, you don't really know.
Right. So do you use sound? Like, will you use certain frequencies of sound near your water?
Mhm.
And what kind of sound do you use?
I have a really loud stereo system that shakes the whole house. So I'll play like Yaima or Beethoven, uh, stuff like, that has a very, uh, they're different, right? Like Beethoven is completely different from like Yaima. So I think I saw her at the convention we were at, and I was blown away because I normally don't get excited at a concert on that
Yeah.
type of music.
Yeah.
And I find if I do that for 3 or 4 days, it just changes the whole game, but I don't do that every day over and over
Yeah.
because that's
Yeah.
repetition, right? It's
Yeah.
in the toolbox, of things I do. And
Gosh, you should,
there's
if you haven't written a book, you should, because of, you've compiled from all these different scientists so much information. And I guess you said workshops, and so do you offer courses
we
for,
do webinars pretty regular, and I
are they
cover,
free, or
yeah,
do they?
they're free.
Awesome.
Our email, it goes out on our email blasts, and I started very like health oriented with water as the foundation on Carrie Reams's work.
Mhm.
More scientific, more measuring, right? But there's a huge factor in that, and for me, like all the guys like Schauberger and Tesla and Carrie Reams and Walter Russell and all these guys who dedicated their lives to creatively expressing what the universe was speaking to them
Mhm.
and more or less were ridiculed. For me, it was like, hey man, this excites me to the point where like I want to live, like to the point where like I'm very motivated every day when I wake up, and I also know what it's like to be unmotivated every day when you wake up. It sucks as a human being when you have nothing that's driving you to look forward for. So you can't ignore that part. You have to find your passion. And I love it when it's practical too. I'm very much like a rainbow mentally. Like we have to have rhythm, we have to have low frequency. We have all the elements of music to make good music. We have to have, in my opinion, to be really healthy. And that's what works for me, right? I'm not saying everybody should be like that, but more or less I teach all those guys like Bruce Lee, right? He didn't pick one form of karate. He studied them all and he took what worked for him and he culminated it. And that's my opinion. I don't say people got to do what I got to do, but I like to expose them to Ayurvedic. I like to expose them to, Walter Russell and Victor Schauberger and Tesla and John Keeley. And I could go on and on. Those are the ones I
Yeah.
know, Native American teachings, right? And
Right.
those always interested me. I got bored of the rigid science of the over male, over logical. This is the way it is. Like that foundation is important, but
Right.
creativity is more important, but you got to have both.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been absolutely amazing. And I feel like I could talk to you for days on end and just pick your brain about water. And I feel like we barely touched the tip of the iceberg. So hopefully our listeners will opt into your free gift. And you're offering an ebook, right, for the listeners today. And I'm sure that they could sign up for future webinars that you offer. And so yeah, before we end, do you want to just tell what your company is and just a few highlights about the products that you've created before we end today? I know
Sure.
it's
Natural Action Technologies, the name is derived from, copy and observe and copy nature, biomimicry. We specialize in water. We do other things also. So we're an engineering, the company originally wasn't real engineering based, and it was lacking a little bit of a foundation there with its research, with its development. And I was with the company since its inception in 2010 as a consultant, as an engineering consultant from the industrial work and the holy moly, this stuff's alive and it's smart and it's intelligent and it's even funny. It'll even screw with you a little bit, scare you a little, make you laugh a little. And there's a baseline to the technology that's worked since the beginning. So we've stuck with that and we've kind of synergized the copy nature and gone to deeper levels. We get involved with Native American projects and water restoration on the riverside, and that's what the American Water Trust was about, the macro. We can
Right.
encourage rivers to heal faster.
Yeah.
And so we sell a product line from portable travel to whole home to commercial applications that involve increasing the vitality of water for the health of the individual, animals, plants, agriculture, the whole nine. It works pretty much everywhere. It's nice and simple. It never wears out. We have good warranties on it, and there's nothing, we don't add anything to the water. That's what's cool about this technology is we're just unlocking the potential of the water that's kind of shut down. And so
Yeah.
it's innovative in the sense that in the future, the human being cannot take the perception that we need to consume the earth in order to survive, meaning it's material. We need materialism in order to survive. That's a lower order teaching. Like we need to burn a fuel in order to get energy. No, you don't. I can assure you. And I believe water, where I started with this was water as an energy source. And what I saw was a biological living thing by fact. So I stopped with the energy source and went back to, you know what? I'd rather help people get a foundation that helps their consciousness expand so they can become, more excited about life and more creative themselves and follow their own passions and use this as a tool. Water does not mind being used as a tool for what it is,
I
to
love that you
support
just
your
said
life.
that allow as we are users of it to allow our consciousness to expand through it.
And that was the basis of our design, is to use, we use a lot of shungite in our material side, which is an advanced form of carbon. And the idea was, if we work on the higher chakra, the blue, if you will, in that direction, that people will figure out the rest themselves. So rather than making units for the heart or making units for, the solar plexus, it was like, let's let the universe communicate better to the individual with this water. And that's precisely what you see start to happen. Most people, especially women respond very well to the dream world, to the channel communication of the more pure information, right? And take on some role in that opening and feel that. Men, a little bit slower to pick up on that, but it's changing. I can see in the last 10 years where men are becoming more awake to that. I think it's kind of natural for the female energies that are predominant in water to connect with the female. As you know, in the life force energy teaching, like seek like, opposites don't attract. And we also have a member site, which is, sign up by email. It's free. And that houses all the past webinars. So you can go back into a lot of the stuff in more depth individually.
Wow. What a
To
great
your
offering.
own liking,
Right. And this is all free, right?
Yes, correct. There's no charge for any of that. You don't have to buy anything. You don't have to pay anything. You just put your email in. We just don't put it on the main website because what was happening is like, you can tell this can go from simple to complicated, like
Exactly. Yes, very
super
clear.
luminal bang. We're in another universe now. Come back,
Yes.
John, come back. And that's what I get excited, and I'll just take off to outer space with it. And
I know.
I appreciate you bringing it back down to earth, and I really enjoyed the interview.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so glad that you shared that. I mean, because like we've barely touched the tip of the iceberg and you're a wealth of knowledge. So I know our listeners will obviously love to sign up and hear more from you. And I've very much appreciated your time. I appreciate you taking time to speak with me today, and namaste. I'm going to
Thank you very much. I appreciate what you do too.